partnerships and alliances on crucial topics could not be taken for granted anymore. At the same time, the absence of the US in multilateral fora created a vacuum that has been seized by an increasingly assertive China. But it has also been a time when the multilateral system and its mechanisms of conflict management have seen new challenges of foreign interference in conflicts such as Libya, Syria, or Yemen. Today, multilateral institutions and their mechanisms to address global problems are under duress, whereas at the same time, the list of global concerns are growing: climate change, global health, international terrorism, arms control, but also the weakening of democratic systems are at the top of the list. Therefore, comprehensive strategies, reliable partners, as well as allies who share the same set of values are needed today more than ever before. With Ambassador Emerson and Ambassador Heusgen, we are having two excellently placed conversation partners who will address these geopolitical and multilateral issues of concern. We are inviting you, the audience, to place your questions right from the beginning into the Q&A box in your Zoom bar so that Ambassador Emerson can take them up and also feed them into the conversation. But before I'm handing over, I would like to thank Ambassador Emerson, Chairman of ACG, and Dr. Steve Sokol, President of the ACG, for this cooperation with CAS New York. And a very special Dankeschön goes to Ambassador Heusgen, who will retire from the German diplomatic service end of the month and who will take on new tasks in order to foster peace and security. Ambassador, it has been a pleasure and honor to cooperate with you and the German mission over the last years. Thank you very much for your support to Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, be it here in New York or in previous capacities and settings. Ganz herzlichen Dank. But now, and without further ado, I would like to give both of you the floor and wish all participants an interesting exchange. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. And Christoph, it is Ambassador Heusgen, it is so wonderful to be with you. I cannot imagine a better or closer relationship than the one that we forged during my period of time in Berlin. And I think it's been the great good fortune of the United Nations, of the United States, and of multilateralism to have you as the permanent rep, particularly during a time that Germany was a member of the Security Council. That's something I hope we can dive into a little bit more as we get started. But thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you, John. It's really a pleasure to do this together with you. As you reminded the public, we worked very closely together during 4 years. These were 4 very interesting years, 2013-17. But what it also demonstrated that even with crisis that we had at the time, the relationship was extremely close, and I'm grateful for that 4 years work together with you. And let me give back the compliments to Andrea to work with the Adenauer Foundation, and I've done that, as she mentioned, over my all of my professional life was always special. The instrument of German political foundations is something very particular for Germany. Not many countries have that, and I think in times where the multilateralism that we discussed today, in democracy in many countries is under strain, political foundations are extremely important. And thank you very much, Andrea, for the work you are doing here in New York.
Well, I would certainly echo that. And let's take off on what Andrea said at the opening in terms of and you just mentioned the challenges to democracies, the challenges to multilateralism that we experienced in the last 4 years. Well, we're about to have 7 very interesting days. We've got, President Biden should be arriving momentarily, if he hasn't arrived already, in the United Kingdom. We'll have the G7. Then he moves to Brussels and we'll have the NATO summit. This is his first overseas trip. After the NATO summit, there's apparently going to be an EU summit. And then after that, he moves on to Geneva and has a bilat with Vladimir Putin. I guess 2 questions out of this, Christoph, for you. The first is, what do you think needs to be accomplished in a big picture sense in terms of these various meetings. I mean, President Biden spoke to the Munich Security Conference virtually back, I believe it was in April, and said, we're back. Is it enough for him just to show up and be nice to everybody, or do we need to accomplish something else there? And then the second thing I'd like you to address is you've probably met with Vladimir Putin more than most people. I know you were accompanying the Chancellor on multiple occasions. She met with him during the Normandy process in the post-Ukraine era and well before that. What would you advise President Biden, if you were his national security advisor, about how he should handle this bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin and what he should try to get out of it? So 2 questions for you there.
I had expected easier questions from a friend, John.
I know how good you are, Christoph. Everything will be an easy question for you.
No, but let me start with the first one. When you were just listing the summits, I went back in time 4 years ago, and at the time I was with Chancellor Merkel when President Trump paid his first official visit to Europe, and he actually was at the NATO. And I still remember his speech from that time. There was nothing about Article 5. There was nothing about the obligation of NATO member states to help each other. And there were a lot of accusations directed towards my country with regard to defense spending. Also, the relationship between the former administration and the EU was not a very, very friendly one. So I think to answer your question, this visit will be totally different. So you asked, well, is it enough to shake hands and make nice pictures? The atmospherics are very important, and to see these summits then with NATO, with the EU, the G7, also the G7 summits. You have seen the pictures of past G7 summits and the controversies. To have now an atmosphere where all these meetings will, and I'm sure they will take place in a friendly atmosphere, in an atmosphere of partnership, in an atmosphere where the partners know we have the same objective. So yes, it is already important that the atmosphere is different. On substance, we have enormous challenges, and you alluded to them, John. And we have to see how we, over this whole range of challenges, that we have to have a common approach. Be it, later this year we have the climate summit. For me, the challenges that climate change poses are the most important one for mankind. We have to see that we work together on this. But on the security issues, we have to see how do we cope with the challenges that have been posed and are being posed by Russia, by China. We are confronting a number of regional crises, and we have to see how we approach them together. We will certainly not agree, and we may talk about individual crises a bit. We may not agree on everything, but to compare notes, to talk in an atmosphere of trust, in an atmosphere where you are ready to listen to the arguments of your partners. And then I'm sure our alliances, the relationship also with the EU, will be stronger than it was before. On your third question, indeed, I had the how should I describe it? Yes, it was a pleasure. It is interesting when you are with leaders, and it's very interesting also when you deal with somebody like Vladimir Putin. And I think that this meeting will be very, very important. Russia has a lot of challenges when you look at their demographics, when you look at their economy, when you look at also environmental problems, societal problems, they have a lot of problems. And at the same time, over the last years, we have seen a regression with regard to democracy in this country. We have seen the clampdown on practically all opposition. Media, there were some opposition media, they're closed down. So you see that Russia is right now pursuing a much tougher policy internally, externally. We see how Russia is very active in protecting the Assad regime in Syria. They have mercenaries in Libya. They are also, when you see how they deal with opposition, with former spies, where they don't hesitate to even kill people from Mr. Skripal in London, to trying to do the same thing with Navalny domestically. Also, the ways they act, they have become more aggressive. So I think one needs to have a very firm stand and be very clear, must not have any illusions about what we are confronted with. But at the same time, and the same holds true for China, there are so many issues worldwide that you can only solve in cooperation. So from a position of clarity, not have any illusions, but I think it's always better to talk and try to see if there's a common agenda. I mean, the renewal of extension of START was already something that was accomplished early on. So on this basis, I think it's good that they really appreciate that there are talks, but one must not have any illusions. One has to see how Russia has been acting. And you alluded to the major challenge that we faced at the time, John, that was Russia aggression towards Ukraine. And coming back to our time together there, I really appreciate the very close cooperation we had at the time, with Toria Nuland when she was Assistant Secretary, and of course with also Susan Rice as National Security Advisor. We worked very closely hand in hand on confronting that issue, on confronting Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Yeah, it was, I must say, it was very important, I think, to all of us that the US sanctions and the EU sanctions be very close, so that Putin couldn't just characterize this as some, American-driven anti-Russia thing. And I know that you and the Chancellor did an incredible amount of work in trying to bring that consensus together within the EU. It's interesting because when you think about Russia, when you think about China, when you think about the reality that we have to engage with them in addressing issues like, in particular, climate change or nuclear proliferation, or I would even say, once we get past this whole situation of how did the COVID virus get started and all that, we're going to need to set up some sort of a multilateral structure to much more quickly and effectively deal with these viruses as they, initially present themselves much more quickly than what happened with this COVID situation. And I don't think we're going to wait another 100 years before we see something like this. So there are important areas where we do have to work together. But how do we work together with them collaboratively while at the same time not diluting our Western principles of a liberal world order and a values-based multinationalism? I mean, isn't there a tension there?
Of course, there's a tension because the values that you and I, that US and Germany we adhere to, are not shared by Russia and China. That is very clear. But there is no way that we can compromise, and I think we have to be very firm. And I think we also, towards Russia and China, we have to insist on that and call a spade a spade. Also, my experience is that Russia and China, I've seen this here in the Security Council. If you are very clear if you say very clearly where you stand, you get also respect. But as you said earlier, we have to try and see how we can find solutions to the problems that we face together. And my impression is, now talking about the US administration, that they're pursuing this. They have been very clear, been very outspoken with regard to Russia, with regard to China. At the same time, you have John Kerry now as the responsible for climate in preparation of the COP in Glasgow, that is trying to advance the subject there. I think that's the only way that one can move forward.
Well, you mentioned your time on the Security Council. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And what are some of the things that you are most proud of being able to accomplish through Germany's membership in the Security Council? And what are one or two areas of your greatest frustration? Areas where we need to really, sort of double down and keep pushing forward.
Well, I don't know if there is something one is really proud of. We are, Germany stands for multilateralism. Germany stands for rules-based order. For us, multilateralism, the incarnation of multilateralism is the United Nations. And we stand for a rules-based order. That is, we believe that problems, challenges should be resolved on the basis of international law, and the resolutions adopted by the Security Council are binding international law. So our policy was a very simple one. We try to see that in the Security Council we come to solutions. So we are always ready, and we are engaged on so many issues, and we can come to some of them. And but at the same time, we stood to our principles. We called a spade, and we told the Russians over and over again that they were violating international law when they invaded Ukraine, or Syria, that was on the agenda and remained on the agenda because the situation still is very grave when you look at the population, when you look at the use of chemical weapons, when you look at how much the Assad regime was actually fighting and killing its own population and putting them into horrible prisons. So those who have seen the famous Caesar photographs know of what I speak. So what you have to do, you have to try and support that's what we did in the Security Council, support a political solution. There are UN envoys that work for it, but at the same time, you have to call out the Russians what they are doing. And when you talk about moments that were, when I think back about the time, was about a year ago when we were in the Security Council trying to prolong a mandate by the UN, by the Security Council, to allow for crossing points into Syria, where the UN, managed by the UN, to allow humanitarian aid. And we were confronted with a situation where Russia, with the support of China supported Russia all the way, tried to close these border crossings and tried to basically have hundreds of thousands of children, of women, of old people cut from humanitarian aid. I called at the time the head of UNICEF. She said, well, when the Russians get their way, 500,000 children will be in a situation where they are starving, where they're deprived from it. So, and there it was, it was incredible. We went into overtime. I put these resolutions which allowed for support for the children on the table, and Russia and China vetoed this. They vetoed it. We prolonged. We went into the weekend. In the end, we got one crossing point at least open, so we were able to prevent the worst. But this shows you what the situation in the Security Council is, where you have to fight about. But at the same time, you have a situation like this. There are also positive developments. Libya, we had Libya, a situation which you all know, and when we entered into the Security Council in 2019, It was a really bad situation when General Haftar there in Benghazi on the eastern part of Libya, it started in offensive towards Tripoli, and again people were dying. There was a military conflict, and then Germany took the initiative. Actually, we did it because we were on Security Council. The UN asked us, and together with the UN, with Hassan Salameh at the time, the envoy, we had in January of 2020, we staged the Libya conference where we got all the people, all the different parties, also those countries that supplied weapons to the parties around the table. And there was the Berlin conference started the process, and we are in a better situation. We took it to New York. We had the Security Council around the table, and they agreed on a resolution where they actually endorsed this peace process in Libya and this political process, so you can achieve something. Also, when you ask me what were Germany's achievements in the Security Council, let me mention two issues that were very important for us. These are more horizontal issues. These are issues that are not specific on conflicts, but phenomena of conflict. One was sexual violence in conflict. When you look at conflicts worldwide, sexual violence is used as an instrument of warfare, and we wanted to raise the attention to this, and we actually adopted a resolution which is a victim-centered approach where accountability is asked. We had the Nobel Prize winners Nadia Murad and Denis Mukwege in the Security Council, and we adopted a resolution, put this on the agenda. Women participation, we had a record number of women briefers in the Security Council, were very high on our agenda. And the second issue that was very important for us was to bring climate change into the Security Council, in particular, of course, the effect that climate change has on security. Because this is a phenomenon that you observe not only in Africa, where it's very apparent, on Lake Chad, but you have it worldwide. You have it from Afghanistan to Haiti, Somalia, and we joined forces. We had 10 countries that supported a resolution that would actually give the UN, give the Secretary General, give peacekeepers more, let's say, more influence, more expertise on the issue, would ask for reports, would ask also the blue helmets that we are in the region to look at this issue. Unfortunately, we had 3 countries that blocked it. One country was yours, John, because the Trump administration thought, well, there is not such a phenomenon as climate change, so why have a resolution? I simplify, but that was basically the argument. This has changed now, the new administration in favor. And again, we had Russia and China blocking. And so we are also, our successor in Security Council are pushing this. But I don't want to bore you, but these are some of the issues that were important for us in the Security Council. These were positions, these were issues that Germany stands for, where we support a multilateralism, where we support the UN.
Well, first of all, it sounds like a very full plate, and that you were able to accomplish a lot. And someday we've got to get Germany as a permanent member of the Security Council. We have a lot of questions coming in on China, and sort of the theme which you touched on earlier a bit, which is how do we, on the one hand, work to cooperate with China, work with China to perhaps accommodate reforms in the international system, with trading system, what have you, but at the same time, hold firm to our values. I mean, that question keeps coming up a lot. I would just say another piece of it is my observation in being here in Germany at speaking at conferences and speaking with people is that there's a definite two different points of view, maybe multiple points of view in Germany about China. Clearly, from some elements of the business community, the auto industry, which is very dependent upon China and success in selling automobiles to China, factories in China, that kind of thing. Concern about certainly decoupling. And I think the German public is concerned about getting caught up in a new Cold War between the United States and China. But I don't think the Biden administration wants to see a Cold War between the United States and China. And I don't actually think that's a very apt analogy, although unfortunately you hear it a lot in the commentariat. But clearly, the difference between the Biden approach to China and the Trump approach to China has been a difference in degree, not a difference in kind. All the tariffs are still in place. Obviously, the tone is somewhat different. There are issues, as you mentioned, like climate change, that we do want to work cooperatively with China on. But how do we square that circle? The Biden administration just put out a list of some 40 companies, Chinese companies, that it feels from a national security standpoint, Americans shouldn't be investing in and supporting. And yet there's also big business interest from Europe, from Germany, to actively engage with China from a business standpoint. How, from your experience in watching China work in the Security Council, as an example, and your experience in meeting with President Xi on your trips with the Chancellor, what's your sense as to how we can, where are the areas where we can really come together and work together from a multilateral standpoint, and not giving up our values, but really making some progress in addressing the challenge of a rising China in today's world?
I'm sure, just as those listening here have a lot of questions, and this is a topic that we will be discussing here. This will be a topic that will be in the center of all the talks and summits that you mentioned at the beginning, John. So, I think it's very good that we discuss it, and I cannot, of course, say what will come out of it, but. Sometimes I see in analysis that there are differences, and say, well, you have different attitudes. I still believe, from my perspective, where I sit here in New York, that the differences are not that deep. What does this mean from a New York perspective? We have been, I mentioned this before, for us, the UN is at the center of multilateralism. The UN Charter is at the center. This is for us kind of the Bible, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, these were all, for you and me, we are no longer 20. We remember the early days, and as a German, after the Second World War, Germany was told by allies, and we have this in our DNA, that we want to resolve conflicts by the rule of law and not by the law of the strongest. So this is why we have an EU now. We have the European Union. We have the European Court of Justice, and we believe in the UN, and that the UN should be there to resolve issues, and that the Charter and the Universal Declaration are the basis. Why do I say this? Because we witness right now on this basis an effort by our Chinese partners, supported by the Russians, to rewrite the UN Charter and to rewrite the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For us, for all the countries that signed the Charter, the individual rights are in the center. For China, it is national sovereignty that is in center, and this is the direction that China goes. That you have national sovereignty, and what a country does with its population is nobody else's business. So, to give you the example, we are discussing again, and I come to this, the fate of the Uyghurs, and one can add to this the fate of the Tibetans, or the fate of the Mongolians. The Chinese say this is none of your business, and for us, also, for a country like Germany with the background of the Holocaust, I mean, this is no question. Of course, the fate of minorities, the fate of Uyghurs or Rohingyas, it's something that we have to take care of, and this is where I've seen here at the UN a very good cooperation, and we are actually putting it on the agenda. We are working together. Just to give you an example, we have the so-called Third Committee, which is the committee that deals with human rights issues. And we have it, they are of course working in Geneva, but it also in the fall, the third committee is meeting here in New York. And over the last 3 years, it was the UK, US, and Germany that took the lead in also writing and working for a declaration or statement where countries actually criticize what happens with the Uyghurs. The Chinese hate it and put enormous pressure on countries to sign up to this. But just to give you the example from 2019 to 2020, we went from 23 to 39 signatories that signed this. And this was something that made real impression on the Chinese. Furious, but we made the point, and it was a very good cooperation. You know, at this last year, I took the lead, Germany took the lead, because many said, well, if the Americans, if the Trump administration does it, it will be seen as if others are instrumentalized. I said, no, we do it, or the Brits do it, because this is something where, you know, our values are at stake. And I think this is what we have to do. We have to defend this rules-based order, and we have to do it here. We have to work. And for this to succeed, American transatlantic, American-German cooperation is key. We must not allow a wedge to be driven between us. Trade is very important. Germany is a smaller country. It's than the US. You have a lot of domestic trade. You're not as dependent on foreign trade as we do. Germany is, you know, as we say in German, export world champion. So we depend a lot of trade, and we are trading with China. US is trading with China, and we tried with this investment agreement that has been so much criticized here also to see that we come on eye level. I don't believe that decoupling is a good measure. I think we need to continue to also trade, but we have to do it on the basis against rules-based, and we have to continue to do this. We shouldn't decouple. But these are discussions I think that the leaders have to do. But I don't want to be too long. But this is some of my thoughts I have when we discuss China.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. It's going to be this is going to be a topic that will be widely discussed, widely debated, and require a lot of thought. And you know, it's just amazing to me how in the United States Congress, one of the few areas where you can get bipartisan support. We just saw it yesterday with a $250 billion package to invest in technology and research to try to improve American competitiveness with China. One of the few areas you can get bipartisanship is in dealing with China. So anyway, I would expect a lot more on that. Let's talk about another area that is a challenge in the world, and that's obviously Iran and what I believe is a need, what I think the Biden administration for sure believes is a need to get back in the JCPOA, to try to get Iran back on the path of, you know, basically preventing it from developing and then, of course, deploying nuclear weapons. From your perspective, where are we on that? What's the prognosis for a renewed JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal?
I'm not, you know, I'm sitting here in New York. I'm not sitting, you know, in Geneva, or I'm not sitting, you know, in Vienna. But you know, the JCPOA was adopted during the Obama administration. We know, I remember from the time with the Chancellor that the Chancellor was skeptical about an agreement with Iran, taking into consideration how Iran acts in the region, the human rights records back home. But we were convinced that the JCPOA would at least solve or postpone a problem that was really imminent, and that was the possibility of Iran to actually have nuclear weapon, and to get the breakout time again, you know, much further extended. And that was what wanted to be, so that Iran would not get the nuclear bomb. The Trump administration said, well, this is too naive, and you see what Iran is doing left and right, and then canceled the agreement. What did we achieve? We achieved that Iran is still continuing its work outside, which when you look at Hezbollah, when you look at the role of Iran in Syria, when you look at the Iran in support of the Houthis in Yemen, it is still horrible what they're doing. The human rights record back home, it's, I think, maybe the worst. When you look at capital punishment, it's probably it is the worst how they look with religious minorities. It's just a nightmare. But at the same time, so this all has continued, but at the same time, the breakout time has been shortened. And Iran, after the US didn't observe the JCPOA by not lifting the sanctions, Iran has now violated, and Iran is again building its nuclear capabilities, building the centrifuges, having more enriched uranium. So we are back where we were before, that Iran is closer to the nuclear bomb than they were before. So we have not achieved anything to so I think when you come from a position where Germany, where we stand, is you go back to the respect for international law. The JCPOA was endorsed by a Security Council resolution. The JCPOA is international law. So the US should go back to this, and Iran has to go back and observe it. And on that basis, now after having lost 4 years, we have to again see how we approach the other issues which have not gone away. And I only hope that in the time remaining until the elections in Iran, that we have something, because I see that after the new elections, until there's a new government, there may not be possibilities to actually come to an agreement. So they will lose time, and if Iran continues to do what it does, I'm scared also that they even further narrow their breakout time. So I think we need to go back to the JCPOA. As I said, we lost 4 years.
Yeah, you make a compelling case for why we need to do that. We've had a lot of questions about multilateralism in general, but also one viewer wants to know, is it time to, and how can we do this, revisit how multilateral organizations operate so that they don't become paralyzed? And he or she, I forget which, cites the veto in the Security Council, the need for unanimity with EU resolutions. I would add to it, you look at the WTO, and it took how many years, maybe 10, 12, 14 years to resolve the Airbus-Boeing situation. What are realistic options for reform of these institutions so that they don't become paralyzed? And then another viewer writes, in light of many global challenges that we face and the erosion of support for multilateral institutions, where is German strategic thinking? And particularly as a German diplomat, how do you view the concept of European strategic autonomy? So there's a lot baked into that, but why don't we talk about reforming multilateral institutions so that they can operate more efficiently, I guess, or effectively, and then maybe address the question of strategic thinking and strategic autonomy.
Yes, John, these are key questions when you believe in multilateralism, which I think I've made plain that we do. Multilateralism has to yield results, and there we clearly have problems. I always think, what would be the alternatives? What could you do? What could you do to, and of course, what has happened in the past, that you formed groups like G7 or G20 that are groups of countries where you don't have a treaty as a base. You come together, you have conversations, you have political solutions, but there's nothing legally binding. It's good that these function, but that they exist. Like the G7, I think it's very important that they accept that like-minded come together, but they don't replace the international institutions. So I share your frustration. WTO, it takes immensely long to change it, and to have the different stakeholders agree was much easier when they were formed. Today, with the larger membership, becomes more the World Health Organization, to really have it as a independent institution where not one large member state can somehow influence also the findings, and then the veto in the Security Council. Yes, it is frustrating, but I just don't see an alternative. We have been working after we left the Security Council. I've been working now 5 months here in the so-called IGN, the intergovernmental negotiations, to see to it that on Security Council reform, maybe we move a millimeter further. And one could see, even if it's minimal, if you really engage, if you have your partners, if you get like-minded around the table, you can move a centimeter. So let's not give up. Let's not give up on these institutions. Let's commit to them and work together. How we revitalize them, strengthen them. I know it will be very, very difficult, but as long as there is no alternative, and I don't see an alternative to build again, if you believe in the rules-based order, who else should set the rules? Unless, as one political scientist mentioned, you want to end up in the jungle, So let's work with it. On strategic autonomy, I give you my personal view on this. I don't like the expression. For me, as somebody who has worked a lot with the US, for me, it will always, on all issues, we have an interest. I also think you Americans, you have an interest to work together. So we shouldn't, have this as an objective. I think we should always strive to see, as we are doing now, how US and Europe can work together. And I would even go beyond. I think that when we talk about Western values, I don't like this expression. These are universals, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have to see how the Biden administration has done, by opening, to Korea, to Japan, to Australia. We have to form a universal. These are universal West. We have to work together. So European strategic, I would use I haven't thought about different expression, and that is that, of course, there will be situations where the US administration says, sorry, but this is an area where we expect you Europeans to take the lead. There is a conflict where, we are engaged in so many things. We have our domestic challenges, sorry, but we cannot send our GIs in such a conflict. And then Europe has to build its capacities, so that Europe can either together with the US, or if then the US chooses not to join, then we can do it. So this is what I would like to see. I think the strategic autonomy, this sounds too a bit as if it's directed against somebody. I would like to see that this complementary way, and there, I believe Europe, also Germany, we have to build the capacities that we can act on the challenges that we are facing. Also, if need be, without you guys.
Christoph, we're at the top of the hour, but Andreas says we can go a few minutes over. Are you okay with that?
Oh, okay. Of course.
Fantastic. We've had a number of questions about Africa, and it kind of gets back to China when you think about the investment China's making in One Belt, One Road, and the almost creating an environment where there may be a dependency of some African nations on China, which I don't think is in the interest of the interest that we're talking about here. So give us your thoughts on the role of Africa in engagement, African nations' engagement in these multilateral organizations moving forward, and maybe also thinking about Germany, contributes a significant amount of money to fund development through the UN, and Africa and nations seem to be the greatest beneficiary of such funding. To what extent, is Germany able to track that in terms of effectiveness? Is it working? Where's the money being best spent? And maybe if you have some thoughts on that, it would be helpful to the audience to share those.
Yes. Africa, I mean, everybody shares this, but Africa is a key continent, and we have neglected it too long. I mean, the Chancellor traveled regularly to Africa. Germany invested in the African Union. Their building that deals with peace and security there, their security was financed by us. The Chancellor has been in Addis several times and several other countries, and in particular since the refugee crisis, when we are faced with migration, so we have to look at the origins, and this automatically leads us to Africa. And indeed, as you said, John, Germany is heavily invested in Africa. Also, let me use this a bit as a PR moment here. Germany is the second largest donor to the overall UN system when it comes to UNDP, when it comes to OCHA, the humanitarian organization, or UNICEF. Germany is always the number one or number two to donor, and as you said, a lot of that money flows into Africa. We have seen here at the UN, and I think this is a very good place to see African reality. We have seen how over the last years China has become stronger in Africa, and China does not hesitate to actually then use its influence that it has in Africa for its objectives. There have been situations, in particular when it comes to the topic which the Chinese try to really work hard against, the Security Council reform, that African ambassadors that have been constructive and tried to move forward had to be recalled by their governments because the Chinese intervened in the capital and said, listen, what you're doing there at UN is against Chinese interest. Although they are fighting for African interests, because when it comes to the reform of Security Council, Africa is the most interested. 54 countries don't have a permanent seat, and so China is using this. The debt trap is certainly playing out in many of the countries. You see how strategic the Chinese are investing in African countries, in ports, in infrastructure. And we need to get a response. First, the Africans, I can say this here, the Africans are not very happy with the Chinese domination, at least the normal when you talk to them. I had one ambassador here who got desperate and said, well, Christoph, can you help me to get this 1,000 pound gorilla off my back? So this is but of course we have to offer something. Germany or the US, we will not put them a stadium there. We will not put them a new palace for the president there. I don't advise that we should do it. I think what we need to do is we need to pursue what we are doing. I would always recommend, and the Chancellor Germany tried this in the and launches in the G20 presidency 2017 with the so-called Compact with Africa, that we concentrate on countries where you have kind of good governance, countries where you have a chance to help them build independent administration, independent judiciary, so that countries are not countries that are led by authoritarian leaders who either don't yield power, or when they yield power, nobody's there to take it over, and you don't know in which direction it goes. Why is this so important? Because the German Mittelstand, the German companies, they cannot be directed like the Chinese. They go into a country where they believe that their investment is safe, and they will only go into countries where they think that there is a safe environment. You have an independent administration. When you have a case, and you go to the court, that you have a chance to retrieve what you have invested. And I think this is what we need to support. We need to support good governance. We also then have to have the instruments that we help our Mittelstand then to invest, and we do that so that when they invest, we give them some credits, or we give them security if something happens. I think that's what we should do. We should do this together. This is the idea of the compact with Africa. But I would concentrate really on countries where there's good governance. Also, when you see in these countries that they flourish, that they do a good job, I think there's an incentive for neighbors to go into the same. When you look, and I have to be honest there, when you look through the map of Africa, and if I ask you, John, please tell me 10 countries where you would say, okay, they go into the right direction. I mean, you'll struggle, but I think that's what we should do, and do this together. But we have to invest there. We have to support good governance,
Yeah, we definitely can't leave the playing field just to China. That's for sure. Let me ask you this, because we really are getting towards the end here. You had 12 years as Angela Merkel's national security advisor, multiple crises and complicated global events that you were dealing with. You had 4 years at a very consequential time as the Germany's perm rep at the UN, service on the Security Council. Are there any lessons that you take away from that, just in terms of how we should approach today's increasingly complex and volatile global environment? And if you have any war stories you want to share, that's cool too.
No, actually, I already presented, I think, basically what I think we should do. But the 12 years I worked with the Chancellor were certainly in my career the highlight, and to have had during 4 years a partner like you in Berlin made I'm very, very present. And as you know, we had, your predecessor was the now governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy. To have had 2 ambassadors that really lived German-American friendship and really embodied this was very, 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 very positive. When I look back, forgive me, but I like to work with the Chancellor, and I can only recommend the way that Chancellor Merkel is working. First, I believe, honestly, having worked with a woman, that woman in politics, the role of women in politics is very important. There are studies done that agreements where women have participated hold better than agreements without women. And so number one. Number two, to work with a scientist is a phenomenon. I always tell the story, I had a life even before Merkel. I worked in the 90s for the German Foreign Minister Klaus Kinkel, who was a wonderful person, and I learned a lot from him. One of the things I learned was that I have to speak briefly. So when he asked for advice, one had about 20 seconds, and then afterwards Klaus Kinkel would say what he believed and what he knew and everything. With the Chancellor, I remember the first time she called, and I was still in Brussels, my previous job with the EU. And so she asked me a question. I tried to explain. I explained that, Ms. Merkel, are you still on the telephone? I said, yes, continue. So what I like is this scientific approach. She wants to, and this is what a general recipe, don't come to a judgment too early. Look at all the aspects. Look at, what are the different sides? What are the different interests? And when Chancellor Merkel took office 2005, November, 3 weeks later, there was the summit of the EU where the financial perspective had to be resolved. And everybody was saying, this is phenomenal, because within 3 weeks, the Chancellor knew all the different budget posts, how to negotiate everything. And there was Jacques Chirac and there was Tony Blair. Sorry to say this, but they didn't have a clue. And the chancellor was there and knowing all the details and knew how to negotiate. And this went on all the negotiations. So you have to know the facts. You work on the basis of facts. And then this is something that I think is important. And she deeply believed in both in the transatlantic relations. You know, she was in favor of TTIP. She would have done even before a trade agreement, and then in the European Union. The Chancellor is a absolutely convinced European. She's sometimes seen as being too tough during the financial crisis, but it was her policy that kept Europe together. And we stayed in the EU, and we solved this crisis. And then there are many challenges there. So I don't know if this answers your question, but you know,
no,
looking back, I think to work with politicians who are politicians that look at the basis, that you know really look at different options and what to do, moving careful. But you know, you have to move careful. There are no easy solutions, and you can only move on gradually.
So the one lesson is not just to work for those, but to perhaps support politicians who take that more thoughtful, values-based, fact-based approach to problem solving. And then, you know, when we've had several folks write in about, you know, when you consider what Barack Obama calls, this is me speaking now, the epistemological challenge that we face globally today with facts and alternative facts. And if you watch this network, you believe the world is one way. And if you watch this one, you believe it's another. And, you know, is the UN, and with the way the pandemic has exposed fragility in the, you know, geopolitical system and structure, is the UN positioned to really, is it where it needs to be in terms of handling some of these or addressing some of the global crises that we, you know, that we face? And just to that end, to kind of put a wrapper on it, as you are leaving, what worries you the most and what inspires you the most?
Yes, I think to respond to these questions, I respond to the worries that you have. The UN is very slow, extremely slow. It worked very well in the 90s, early 2000s, at the end of the Cold War, with a more assertive Russia and more assertive China, and then with Trump again, we have a lot of problems. As I said, there is no alternative, but I'm worried. I'm worried that, you know, on issues that you mentioned, the new kind of conflicts, you know, cyber war, you know, how is that regulated? Then how do you, I mean, we talk about free, you know, the media and freedom of journalism and freedom of expression. You know, when you look back, John, at your experience with newspapers and radio, I mean, we never had it, as you described, with fake news, that journalism is no longer there. I wonder to which schools these journalists go that work for some of these networks today, and you know, where they are no longer you know, feel obliged to present the truth, but you know, to present as the spokesperson of Trump, the first one, said, well, there may be alternative truth, you know, and how to overcome that. The responsibility of social networks, you know, the fact that it's Twitter that decides if a president or former president can express himself or herself on Twitter. Is this the right way, or should there be some, you know, legal basis for this, or should there be some international ruling? How do these platforms operate? And the Secretary General Guterres is thinking of this, but he has given up any hope to have a binding resolution on this. But the best you can hope for is kind of a code of conduct, you know. But how to deal with this? But let me tell you the biggest concern I have, which is more general one, and that is, we talked a lot about Angela Merkel, and you know, there are leaders of her capacity. I'm biased, of course, but I think objectively, you know, she was for 10 years or so, Women of the Year in many newspapers and polls. Who today is ready? Somebody who has experience in life, business or family, and is ready to engage in politics, is ready to stand up in the city council, is standing up in the state council, is ready to run for parliamentarian government if he or she knows that, as one as you start and you have you say what you think it should be done, and then get this shitstorm and get all the attacks on social media, get attacks even on your life threats. And we need a functioning democracy for our systems to survive. A system like the Chinese one, where it's simply a dictator basically, who tells the party, who tells everybody what to do, and organizes the whole state. We don't want to end like this. We want to preserve our liberal democracies, but for this, certain rules have to apply. And I think this is what we have to concentrate on over the next years, to see that what happens with regard to populism, to the social media, that we keep this in the framework that you and I learned to have that, in the let's not talk about the good old times, but where journalism was still journalism.
Well, Christoph, I couldn't agree with you more on that, and it's an area of great frustration. We have now gone 20 minutes past our time. Deeply appreciate your taking the time to be with us and share with us. I would tell you we could go for 3 hours, given all the great questions that have been coming in here. We've a very smart and astute and knowledgeable audience listening. And we've had zero drop off over this time. So you've kept them quite engaged. Also want to thank Andrea, Sebastian, Lily, the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and Steve Sokol and the American Council on Germany for helping to pull all this together. And Andrea, let me throw it back to you to wrap everything up.
Yeah, first of all, my very special thanks to this excellent conversation. To both of you. You have been very engaging conversation partners, and you have provoked a lot of thought in our audience. I always feel a bit guilty if you can't capture everything into such a conversation, because I think it has been extremely rich, and we have covered the whole spectrum of international politics. So thanks also to our audience, who also remained very faithful to our discussion. And yeah, thanks to both of you. Ambassador Emerson, thanks for also co-hosting this conversation with Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. And my very special thanks to Ambassador Heusgen. My very best wishes to you and your family for the next kind of chapter that you are opening up. And I'm happy to see you end of the month again personally. And I hope that also with ACG, we can continue this cooperation in the future, hosting these kind of events, and hopefully also soon in person. Thank you very much for your time, your attention, and the excellent input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye.
Cheers.
Tschüss.